Welcome back to another episode of CRE, The Unspoken Truth. I'm Charlie Coppola, and I'm with my father, Craig, our CEO, longtime broker, and top producer at Lee & Associates. Welcome back.
Excited to be here. Love this podcast. My favorite one.
Yep. Today, our topic is rocks, gravel, sand, something you've coined. You've, recently written a book on it. And so I know we'll talk a little bit about a book. There it is. And so why don't you just set the stage for us and tell us what is rocks, gravel, sand, and where does that come from?
I was always so excited about this podcast because I have spent the last 30 years of my life thinking about rocks, gravel, sand. And so the idea is rocks are your big life goals that you're super focused on, you want to do. And sand is the day-to-day activities that go along with it. And about 30, 40 years ago, I'm a super goal setter, as you know. I started reading goal setting books and books on how to, really get out of life, really nail your rocks. And I think I realized 20 years ago that all these books talked about, hey, write down what your big goals are and then go execute. And there's a huge, and you and I have had this conversation a lot over the last 5 years, there's a huge chasm, a huge gap. And the gap is what I call gravel. And it's taking these rock goals and crushing them down into gravel and then sand so that you can execute. And so the entire book, 200 pages, is all about gravel, which is taking big rock goals and turning them into sand. And we're going to talk about gravel today, so it's a big topic of mine all the time, as you know, probably broken record.
Yeah. So it sounds like you've always been a goal setter. Were you a goal setter, growing up, or did it start with business? What started that for you?
Well, I was an athlete. And so as a baseball player in high school, you set goals. I know my senior year, I had a goal to lead the state in hitting. And I ended up hitting 508 my senior year for big schools, making an all-state team, getting a college scholarship. And so I started really being a goal setter in terms of athletics. And so I always kind of had the athletic goal setting. And then I found it was so powerful to me that after I got out of college and got done playing with the Twins organization, that I started just taking all of those things that I learned while setting goals in athletics and then turning them into other areas of my life. So from very early on, so 22, 23 years old, I've been a goal setter. So for a long time.
And is that something, I know your father had a big influence on you and was your baseball coach, and obviously your dad. Is that something he taught you, or how, do you know where you picked it up?
Nope, he didn't teach me that. He wasn't a goal setter. He wasn't somebody who did it. None of my brothers were goal setters. I think it was just something that I picked up along the way. There was no one person in my life. It was more, this is what I want to go to do. And I do remember, I didn't call it gravel at the time. I do remember saying, hey, if I'm going to be this good hitter, this high average hitter, then I'm going to need to get swings. And my buddy Nick Servey and I, who are still friends today, I remember after every practice, we'd like, okay, we're going to get 100 extra swings, and we're going to get 100 extra ground balls. And so we started tracking those kinds of things, certainly just on pen and paper at the time. But those are the early stages of the tracking stuff that I do today.
And then when you transitioned into business, how did your goal setting and goal tracking change, or how was it the same, or did you think about it really just the same way?
Well, I think there's a period of some 3 or 4 years. There's this transition, and I think everybody goes through it. Certainly, if you're an athlete, you go through it. All your life, you've been focused on one thing. I had one big goal. I want to play professional baseball. I want to try to make it in the big leagues, blah, 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 blah. And there was a couple years after I got released where I was kind of floundering. And I think, you and I talked about this as you went through in college, where you were, a two-sport athlete out of high school. And same thing happening with our daughter Claire, where you all of a sudden we have decisions and choices, and we can do things with our life that we couldn't do before as an athlete. And it takes some time to kind of realize that you need structure And so 2 or 3 years after I had one big goal, I wanted to become a commercial real estate broker. And it took me a couple of years and a couple of jobs to get hired to do that. But once I got into brokerage, that's when it's like, okay, this is it. This is my career. I need to really focus in. And I went back to the goal setting, and that goal setting really was really something super powerful. And I think I went by a lot of people because I had specific goals that I was setting at that time. So that was, say, 3 years after I got out of baseball. So say 4.5 years out of college.
Yeah. And I think, growing up, high school, college, for sure, in athletics, it's always super structured, right? You have parents, you have teachers, you have coaches that plan your day for you, and they tell you what's important and what homework to do to prepare for the test and what practice needs to get done to prepare you for the game.
Yep.
And then, college is a little bit more of a transition, obviously not, with the athletics, you still have coaches and teachers and stuff, but after, life is super gray.
Yeah.
And there is no, manual, there is no, there's very few people telling you this is what you need to do.
Right.
So
the rock goal, the rock goal from high school is to get a college degree, right? That's the rock. It's like, this is the main thing in my life. I don't have to think about anything else. And then, starting your junior or senior year, for most people, they're starting to interview, they're starting to think about their next job and their career. For somebody who's an athlete, I'm thinking about getting drafted, right? I'm graduating from Nicholls State, getting my degree. That's fine. But how do I get drafted? What am I going to do when I get drafted? How am I going to make this a career? And so all of a sudden you get released and then you're going, wait a minute. Okay, now I have to reset myself. And that's where the goal starts coming in. And those goals are super hard at that time. As in we should move on to the business side of this, but you want to get a career, you want to find a partner for life, you want to have kids. Those are big rock goals, but how do you get to those is really, really hard. And so I spent a bunch of time thinking about that in my late 20s, early 30s. And that's where this passion project for 30 some years has come in, really thinking about gravel. And I call it gravel. It's part of my culture. And I do it all the time.
So gravel's the main purpose of the book, and I want to get there. I have one last question more on rocks, but to me, rocks is all about just continuously asking yourself, what do I want in life and in business, and what do I want in my brokerage career or whatever it is? And you get to choose it. I think you have a friend, Paul Braun, right? What's his phrase? You get to you get to be the captain of your life. You get to design your life, right? So he says that all the time, and it's true, right? You get to choose what you do, where you spend your time on, what's important to you, what's not important to you. Is there anything beyond that for rocks other than just asking yourself, what do I want?
Well, I think the idea is, and we're seeing this a lot today with the Gen Zs, that they want it all. I want a balanced life, work life, and I want to do this and I want to do that, and I want to have meditation throughout the day. And I think the answer is, in my other book, the Fantastic Life Revisited, is you can have everything you want in your life, everything you want. You just can't have, you can have anything you want in life. You can have anything, you just can't have everything. And so rule number 12 of the Fantastic Life is do nothing in moderation. And the reason we do nothing in moderation is because these rock goals have to be so powerful, so driven, so important. And it's like what we talk about with OneSource, that, this company that we have at OneSource now, this is a company that most VCs would have gone away from a year ago, 18 months ago. And now we're seeing tons of traction. We see, the company's doing really well now. And the reason it is because we were so powerfully driven to kind of make sure it's successful. And I think that's one of my secret sauces in life, is the rock goals have to drive you. They can't be just, hey, I want to get a spouse and have 2 kids. That's not the goal. The goal is I want to raise, your mom and I, now we're going to be married 34 years. I want to have a long-term relationship with Tracy. I want to have kids, multiple kids. I want to raise those kids so they're all successful. And that's the rock. That has to drive you, because it's really hard to raise kids. It's really hard to have long-term relationships.
Yep. Well, and rocks, in comparison to gravel and sand, rocks are big. And so you don't get
Massive.
as many of them, right? So you get a couple and you got to pour a lot into those, right?
Well, there's two things. One is they're massive. They take, and sometimes decades. We raised kids. Kate's now 32 years old, so we've been parents now for 32 years. We're now grandparents, and so these are multi-decade goals that if you don't really get them right, you could wake up. And we hear this occasionally where somebody goes to become a doctor. They spend 8 years and they decide they don't want to be a doctor. It's like the rock goals have to be constantly looked at and make sure they're driving you in the direction that you want to go. And so the rock goal is something that's big. It's something that drives you. It's something that's potentially multi-decade. And then you have to really figure out. That's why gravel becomes so important, because these rock goals just sit here and you can't just say, oh, I think I've told you all along, my number one goal, I was always financial independence. And so, Tracy would ask me, what do you want for your birthday? I'd go, financial independence. Because, we came from a fairly blue collar family with no money. And that's what drove me for 30 years. It drove me.
So now let's talk about your favorite topic. You've been waiting to talk about it. So gravel, right? So you have your handful of big rock goals, right? Financial independence, raising a family, a long-term successful marriage. Then, that's great to write on paper, but then what, right? So gravel is the next piece. What are some of the key things you think about or questions you ask yourself when you're saying, okay, I've got this big rock goal. Now let me break it down to something that's more bite-sized, achievable. What does that look like?
So I think let's break gravel down into two things. And it took me a long time to get to this piece. One, when you set the big rock goals, the first thing you have to do is make sure they're set up properly. I want to have 4 kids. I want to raise those kids. All 4 of them, I want to be college educated. And so you want to have that. And I want to have this done by 2020. Let's say that's the goal. The second piece then is, okay, what aspects, and this is where it gets really complicated and why nobody wants to spend the time on it, and why I spend a ton of time on gravel. The messy middle is what it is. Gravel is messy. It's in the middle. It's not smooth. It's not like sand where you can walk across it. It feels rough. It's not like a big rock that you could see it in long distance. It's spending time on taking those goals and saying, okay, let's look at the obstacles that are involved in this. Look at the distractions that will occur. So we have obstacles, which are, as my friend Dan Sullivan, the strategic coach, says, obstacles are the raw material for all the solutions in all your rock goals. So we have to look at every obstacle we can. We have to look at everything that is part of it. And so this is what gets really hard, and where people get distracted is it's not glorious work. It's not front and center. It doesn't give you the dopamine rush that you get by saying, I want financial independence. That gives you dopamine rush. And then you say, okay, what does that mean? Well, it means I have to save money. Well, how much money am I going to save? How am I going to get to that point? How am I going to have the conversation with Tracy? We need to save this kind of money. We need to invest here. We need to cut back on this part of our budget. Those are really tough questions to ask, and they take a lot of time, and the answers aren't necessarily clear. And so that's why I spent the time over the last 2 or 3 years writing this gravel book, because that's what we want. So that piece of it is asking the tough questions and doing it. And then the other piece of it is the operational piece. Is there a way to hack doing gravel? And I think that's what this book is trying to do. It's trying to hack the gravel process that is super messy, super hard to do, and turn it into something that's a process. It's something that's scheduled out, something that you can actually figure out how to do.
So I obviously am familiar with this concept. I've talked about it with you for years. And I've always thought gravel is being super analytical, right? So you take your goal and you look at it from every little perspective and you say, okay, if this goes wrong, if this goes right, if I put too much emphasis over here, but not enough over here, there's 1,000 ways this could go wrong. A few ways this could go right. What's the right, recipe for me that's, achievable, and will get me to my goal. Is that a fair kind of
It's a great,
description,
it's a great
explanation.
way to look at it from your standpoint.
Yeah.
I think I focus a lot more on what is the path to get there and what are those obstacles that are in my way. And so when you have that path, so it's like, here's my rock goal, and it's going to take me a decade to achieve. Okay, what are the major milestones that have to occur in those before I can hit that goal? So you can label out all your milestones. And then you can start saying, okay, what are the obstacles that would be in the way of getting through each one of these milestones? The first one, second one, third one, fourth one. So I like to focus all of my attention on making sure that this is the path I want to be on. I don't like to spend a lot of time on, if this goes wrong, I'm going to go here. I can always talk to that when I get there, and that happens a lot. But I want to really lay out the path to get me on the road to milestones, to get me on the road to gravel or to rocks.
Yeah. And what does this look like tangibly? Do you write this stuff, like all the gravel stuff down, or, what does it look like? Brainstorming sessions by yourself? Like, I don't know.
It is, yes. The answer is yes. I write all of this down. And what I found is I have this sine wave of how I do my goals. Some years, over the last 5 years, I've been super detailed. As you know, right now, my goals are 86 typed, 86 pages long, 11 by 17, typed with graphs and all that. That's probably the most detail I've ever been. This year, I cut that back. So the last 3 or 4 years, they've been in the 70 to 80 to 90 pages long. And so now I'm probably down to 50, and I'm looking at it. So there's this sine wave of where my attention goes, and I look at it and I go, okay, this is too much. I back off. On this piece, it's not enough. And so I don't put myself into a corner that says it, but I have to write it all down, because I have to get to the point where, and I follow this guy, Tom Bayou. He says, if you don't know exactly what you're going to do in the next 15 minutes, then you haven't done your homework. You don't have your purpose driven. So I disagree with that. And I agree with it, but I disagree in the sense that we haven't done enough gravel work to get to that, what my sand is going to be. Execution is hard. Execution is super hard. And so we want to make it so that we only think about execution when we're executing. And the people who don't have a lot of gravel don't have the execution so clear in their mind. They're just focused on execution. So we know right now, these are the 5 things that we've got to work on our One Source company. And we're focused almost exclusively on that. And every time we do it, like we're working on that. And this is what reason we're doing it, because we spent the time in the gravel.
And so your goal is your 70, 80 pages. Is that, it's a lot of gravel? Like, is that a lot of different, so you've got your goals, and then you brainstorm and you talk through obstacles, and you write down, and all these different pages, you write down, different obstacles. And then I guess the other question I have too is, does it ebb and flow, like get, bigger and more complex, and then simpler due to the amount of goals you have, or just the way that you look at it? Like, what drives the ebbs and the flows?
So I do, most people, I would say, I'm older, so I would say most people should only have somewhere 3 to 5 rock goals. That's it. I mean, you can't really execute more than that. I have 10, but I'm a little bit older. I have 10, and I've been doing this a long time. So I have 10, those 10 goals are on one page. Those rock goals are on one page of the 86. The other 85 pages is gravel. And I take each one of these things and I break it down. For example, I want a great relationship with my 4 kids. So you live in town with us. So I have a rock goal of seeing all my kids. At least I get to see you every day, but your sister, I want to see her at least once a week live in person. Okay. And I want to see Margot, her granddaughter, once a week live in person. So I track that. So that's a rock goal that I sit down and say, okay, this is for me to have the relationship with Kelly that I want. At least once a week, I'm seeing her and her daughter and her husband live in person. I track it. And then I want to at least talk to her at least once or twice another week, during the week on the phone. So that's something that I track. And then every week, every month, I follow those up and I see, am I on that goal? That's part of my rock, part of my gravel, to kind of see, am I heading this down? And I do it for each one of the kids. So every single day, I'm tracking this kind of stuff. Yesterday, I just got off the FaceTime with Kate, who doesn't live here, and Beckett and Kennedy. And so tomorrow morning, I get to check. I got a FaceTime, so I get to do that. So once a week, I want to be on FaceTime with the kids that aren't living here. So that's just part of this gravel that allows me to feel comfortable that I'm working on my rock goal of having a relationship with the kids.
How do you balance, because you travel, you've got, busy weeks with business, you've got, whatever, how do you balance and give yourself grace to where you're not you haven't seen your daughter for 2 weeks because you've been out of town doing something else you wanted? Like, how do you not get overwhelmed or, feel like you're not losing at one of those goals when you have competing interests?
Well, that's so part of spending the time on these 3 to 5 rock goals for most people is to kind of understand that one goal takes away from the other. There is, I have a goal, as 30 nights a year on the ground, and I have a goal of 200 sunrises a year. Well, that means I'm up before the sunrise, an hour before sunrise, at least 200 days a year. I'm 60 days a year. As you know, I got back yesterday or the day before yesterday from Glacier, where I was backpacking for 2 weeks off the grid, not talking to anybody. So I balance that by saying, this is another goal that I have. So I have to work on all of these. And I go, okay, well, if I'm going to have 50 or plus in-person meetings with Kelly, then I know that these 60 days I'm not going to be here. So I have to make up for that. So we're going to go to Santa Barbara, as you know, this week with the whole family. And I'll see her every single day and her daughter every single day for 2 weeks in a row. And so then I'm like, okay, now I'm back on track. There's 14 of my 50 right there. So I actually think about it. It sounds like you're making it really a numbers game. And the answer is no, I'm giving myself permission to win. And so I set the gravel up so that I can just do a sand thing. I just want to see Kelly. I want to hang out with her. There's no pressure for me to coach her, to do anything else. It's just to be with her. So a Friday night, we went and babysat Margot. We got to see John and Kelly. Or Saturday night. I got home on Saturday. Saturday night I was over. I saw Kelly. I saw Margot. Next 2 weeks, I'm going to see them every single day. And so I'm going to get way ahead for this month. I'm going to be really there. And so it makes me feel good that I've thought about it. I've crushed that gravel and it's become sand.
Yep. Awesome. So let's spend the last couple minutes on sand. That is daily execution, right? So it's day to day. You've crushed the rock into gravel. You figured out what you need to do to ultimately achieve this big decade-long rock. And so sand is day to day, week to week, year to year. Do you think about it in those time chunks?
Yeah, I think about it in a year. Like I think I give myself a permission. I set my annual goals, and then I give myself permission to not change those goals for a full year. And so during that year, I've set up the goals for those, and I'm trying to execute on all those. I saw an article today, if you're executing on 85% of your goals, you're hitting stride. So, and that's where I try to get, I'm not getting all of them. I'm setting them up. I'm trying to get there. Some of these goals have taken, a lot longer to execute than I thought they would. And some are just, that's how they are. They're on an annual basis. So the sand piece of this is execution. And sand is, if you haven't done it, if you don't know what to execute, that means you haven't done enough gravel work. And it means you have to circle back in, do more gravel work. And by tracking the stuff that you do, you create this little flywheel with yourself. Am I on track? Am I doing it? Am I doing the right thing? If I'm not, I got to go back into the gravel, the messy middle. I got to think about this a little bit more. I got to think about it differently. I got to try something else. Yep. And so the sand is really good. I'll give you an example. That's an easy one. As you know, this year we're doing snatches. Every time we lift weights, we're doing snatches with 24 kilo kettlebell. And my idea was to do somewhere around 5,000 snatches this year, which then I broke down, divided by 12 months is whatever, that's 60 times 12, whatever is that, 600 a month. And so last month I hit 1,000 snatches with a 24 kilo bell. It was the first month, and that was the month of August. And so I'm on track with that. I feel really good about that. Why was that? Because I got 20% of my goal in 1 month. So I'm gonna break my goal. I'm gonna get there. but it also drives me every single time I get into the weight room. I got to do my snatches. I got to get 100 snatches in. So
So
those are easy ones.
the tracking, and you and I both are good at this and do it in our own ways, but
You're great at it.
the tracking is, it's a way of measuring if you're actually achieving, your goal, right? Or if you're actually working towards it on a regular basis, right?
That's right. Tracking is tracking your sand, and it tells you, do I have the right goal? Have I done enough gravel? Am I tracking the right things? And then it gives you feedback, immediate feedback. And I think a lot of people just write down the goal. I want to have a great relationship with my spouse. That's not a goal. That's a slogan. And so what does a great relationship mean? How many nights a month am I going to spend with them? How many connection days am I going to have? How many trips am I going to do? How much time am I going to spend with them? How many dinners am I going to have? What else am I going to do with them? Do we want to read books together? So you go through all these questions, and that's all gravel. That's all messy middle. I don't want to end. I do want to spend just a minute on the kind of premise of the book is there is a process for gravel. And that process is, I'll just overview real quickly, and then you have to buy the book to really get into it. But there's 4 things that you need to do, and it need to be done in this order. The first thing is you have to look at what you want to do and what you're good at. So if you're looking at when you're in the gravel and you're saying, what piece of this goal do I really want to do that I'm going to execute, and what am I really good at? And the combination of want to and can do, you do those first. Those are the things that you want to do. Like I have normalized getting up before sunrise, and I can get on the trail in the dark without a headlamp, and I hike to sunrise. I did this morning with my buddy. And that is something I've normalized. I do that all the time because I know I can do it. I know I can get up. I have that down. Those things you want to do right away. I have a really good job of planning events for family. I am the family, as you know, I'm the family planner. We're going to go on the Santa Barbara thing. I'm the one who puts it all together. I organize it. I make sure everything's there. We're going to have our family finance meeting there. We're going to have our family forward meeting there. Those things are all done. I'm really good at it. So I want to make sure want to, can do is first. The second is habits. What are my daily habits that I'm going to do? If I can't get to the point where I'm want to, can do, then I want to go to habits. And how can I create a little habit? Like I'll give you an example. I got this morning routine. That's a great example that we're doing. I've got a lot of people have like Sunday dinners for their family. That's a great habit to have. Every Sunday you're going to come over to the house and we're going to have dinner. There's lots of different habits that you can create. Not only flossing your teeth, not only making calls on Sunday. I tell you a habit I used to have is when my folks were alive, every time I got in the car, I would dial my dad, and for the first 2 years since after he passed, every time I got in the car, I was thinking I'd just get the phone. I started dialing my dad because it was such a habit and I wanted to call him every time I got in the car. So that's the second piece. The third piece is processes. How do you create a nice process? And a process is a very simple thing, right? It's maybe 2 or 3 things that are in a row that you do. Like we have a process where Tracy was losing her keys all the time in her thing. So I just put a little bowl by the back door, drop your key in here. Your keys are in here every time. That's a little process. We have hundreds of little processes that we do. Some people just think that they're normal. No, we create the processes. How you create habits and processes is how your life's going to be. And so that's it's a little bit longer than a habit. It's a little bit more, but it's not something that's super complicated. And the fourth thing is systems. How do you tie in all sorts of things that are disparate? And that's where the really tough part is. And this is only when you can't do the other 3, you get to the bottom. And lots of goals have all 4 of these things. There's pieces that you do really well and you want to do them. There's things that you can turn into habits. There's little processes you can do. And then finally, there's a little piece that you just can't figure out. And that's where you spend a lot of time creating a very complex system of maybe it's multiple people in it. Like my unique ability process that I do because of how we run our companies, I have this black hole thing. It's like when I get to a black hole, I've got to give it to somebody else and then give it back to me. And you do a good job of that with our OneSource company. And so this is the 4-step process of going through gravel to create sand.
So
does that make sense, or is that kind of too complex?
It's complex for sure. It's
That's why you got to buy the book.
You got to buy the book. That's true. So what you start with what you want to do and what you're good at. If if something part of your goal doesn't check that box, you go to habits. Can you build a little habit around it? If something isn't a simple, easy habit, you got to put a process together. And at that point, if you still don't, you got to put a system and maybe a system invokes other people to hold you accountable or whatever it is, right? What do you?
Yep,
Yep.
that's exactly right. Good. That was great. Good summary.
There we go. Awesome. Any last words on sand or any last plug for the book?
You know, it's interesting because my passion has been living a fantastic life. And that book, the Fantastic Life Revisited, I wrote The Fantastic Life 10 years ago. Fantastic Life Revisited came out 2 years ago. And the real reason for Fantastic Life and my living that, I think, has been the fact that I've been thinking about rocks, gravel, sand so much over the last 30 years that I've spent so much time in the messy middle and the gravel kind of figuring out. I think that's my secret sauce. Everybody's like, how did you get here? How did you get all these things? We have great kids and a long-term relationship with Tracy and successful businesses and, financial independence. And you've done all these cool trips, all that other, whatever stuff it is. And it's because I've spent hundreds of hours, thousands of hours in the messy middle gravel, figuring out how to turn it into sand and then executing in something that's very passionate for me. So it works for me. I like to think it worked for a lot of other people. And I don't think there's a lot of people out there talking about gravel at all. I've looked. It's very difficult it's not a lot of people want to spend time on it because it's messy. It's hard. You have to make tough decisions. You have to give up things. You have to walk away and you have to do things that you don't necessarily want to do all the time. So the gravel is tough.
Yeah. Have hard conversations. You said something that, this is the unspoken truth. You said part of gravel is, financial independence, your big rock goal. Part of gravel for that goal is having that conversation with Tracy, my mom, your wife, of we've got to cut our budget here or whatever. That's not something people like to talk about. It's not something that is in other goal setting books or courses or whatever it is. It's, there's a lot of hard conversations that can help you get to your goals if you're willing to have them.
Yeah, and that's that's one of the reasons why we titled this The Unspoken Truth, because we start conversations at work and our team. This is going to be an unspoken truth that we need to get out. And having those, there's a book 4 or 5 years ago called the Fierce Conversations. Some people call them fierce conversations. We always call it unspoken truths. Like we want to speak the unspoken truth. And so once you get clear with that I'm going to be super honest with where I am. And I use this all the time, Jack Welch, see things as they are and not how you want them to be. And so if you see reality, that forces you to have really candid conversations. And I have a ton of candid conversations with myself all the time. Like, I'm getting older. It's like, okay, we've been talking about, we used to do 20 miles on the trail and we could do that. It's like, we don't want to do that anymore. I have to just have that conversation. We had the conversation. We said, okay, now let's back off our miles and pick out, which is forcing us to do less longer hikes, but more focused on where we want to go. So like we want to do a 50-mile hike where we used to do a 100-mile hike. So that means we have to really focus on the juiciest 50 miles that we want, as opposed to just cranking out miles. And that's just a decision we're making as we get older. And there's hundreds of those kinds of decisions that narrow you down into really forcing your goals as to what they should be.
Last question. What inspired the metaphor rocks, gravel, sand? Did you steal that from someone or did you?
Yeah, it's out there. There's a professor talking in class and he has this jar and it's filled with a bunch of big rocks. And he says, is it full? And the class says, yes. So he pulls out gravel and he fills the jar with gravel and he says, is it full now? And they said, yes. So he pulls out sand and he pours it in. Is it full now? And the answer is yes. And he says, the point of this is until you have your rock goals in there, if you filled it with sand, which a lot of people do, they don't think about their rock goals. They just do a lot of things every day. And that's one of the things I think we're losing now. I'm going to balance my life. I'm going to do stretching in the morning. I'm going to do yoga and at night. I'm going to have meditation twice a day. I'm going to go for a walk with my dog. I'm going to work for a little bit. I'm going to have dinner with my wife. That's all sand stuff. That's all might be great. And it might be something that fits into your business. But if you don't put the rock goals in first and know exactly what those are, you're not going to get any gravel and you're not going to get any other sand in there. So the rocks have to drive the processes downward. Rocks to gravel, tons of gravel, messy, and then execution in the sand.
Yep. Well, the if you just do sand, that leads to doing a lot of stuff and then waking up 10 years later and it didn't get you where you wanted to be, you know, or there's regret or whatever, right? So
It's really, and I have run across my career. I've run across lots of people in different industries. One of the most poignant ones is I was a broker. I was 2 or 3 years in a brokerage. I was always making good money, and I had a buddy that I played baseball with, and he's like, "Hey, I got to AA. I've spent the last 6 years kind of working my way through the minor league. So I'm a 27-year-old guy with a degree and no business experience. What should I do?" And I'm like, got to start zero, man. You got what's your rock goals? And so I felt like there you can have a lot of time. You can wake up. I just had this conversation last week. Our guide in Glacier on our long backtracking trip is 25 years old, and he's, you know, he got done with college and he became a guide and he loved it. And he's like, "But I don't see myself. My body's falling apart. He's carrying this big pack." And I'm like, "What are your rock goals? What are you going to do? Is being a guide at 50 part of your rock goals? If it isn't, then you've done a cool thing for a couple of years. Let's figure out what your rock goals are." So we spent some time talking about that. And I think that's what's really important. And so as long as you know what you want to do, very clear and driven goals, then the rest of it we can fall in place. And gravel is the solution. Gravel is the way.
gravel, the messy middle. Thank you for sharing your secret sauce. Go order the book. Is it out yet? When's it out?
It's going to be out in October, end of October.
October. So I think this will go out in October. So right around the same time. That's perfect.
Yeah, we're going to.
Timing on our end.
I love it.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much and appreciate it.
You bet. Love this topic.